Hello, everyone. Welcome. Come on in. We've got just waiting for Zoom to let everyone in who's been patiently waiting. Come on in on a Monday night for learning. It's a good night for learning. Wonderful. We're just seeing those people kind of stream in here. When the numbers kind of steady out in a minute or two, we'll get started. We're so lucky. We have Chris White with us tonight, and we're very lucky to have her. It's pretty exciting. I see a couple chats starting too. Quebec, Vancouver Island, Denman Island, BC. People from all over Canada so far, and Wisconsin, Florida, Los Angeles. Americans. Chris, you brought the Americans with you too. Wonderful. Wonderful. Mexico. Okay, we might have a furthest traveled kind of furthest distance winner so far. Wonderful. Perfect. Okay, we're kind of steadying out on the numbers, so I'll kind of Australia just I think beat Mexico here. So starting to slow down on the numbers. We'll kind of just give a starting on a gentle introduction, but it'll be a few minutes before we dive into the presentation, so we'll have time for anyone kind of still coming in to do so. You are all, I can see, using the chat, which is wonderful. This is perfect. Yeah, have a visit. That's great. We are welcome to a webinar by Canadians for Homeopathy. We are so proud of our webinars. We love doing them, and we are a grassroots Canadian organization dedicated to talking about homeopathy and really getting homeopathy, raising homeopathy awareness about homeopathy among Canadians. And as we can see by the large international audience today elsewhere, we're consumer focused. We want average everyday people to get to know homeopathy, to get familiar with it, comfortable with it, get to know and love it like we do, and feel supported to use it and learn more, and know, when to call a professional homeopath and when to do it yourself or learn more, or go to your local health food store. So there are tons of online resources and that too, and we offer one of those resources. Our website is canadiansforhomeopathy.com, and there's lots of good statistics on there, fun statistics about homeopathy, but also a great FAQ section. So if people in your lives are asking you, what's the difference between a homeopath and a naturopath, and you're fumbling for your words, it's on our FAQ section. Or if you want to find a homeopath in Canada, we've got a list of practitioners and in Canada and all that sorts of stuff. So, we are our sort of our guiding pillars are to educate, communicate, advocate, and celebrate everything about homeopathy. And these webinars are one of them. Please feel free, if you have anything you want to talk to us about, drop us an email at learn@canadiansforhomeopathy.com. We would love to hear from the people who attend our webinars and who know about us and spread the word. We also are looking for volunteer help too. So drop us a line. Communicate. So another way to think, I like to think it's also about building community. We love to build community around homeopathy. So I can see everyone is doing that in the chat already. This is awesome. Please use the chat box to chat amongst yourselves, to chat with everyone. As far as questions for our wonderful presenter Chris goes, please pop those in the Q&A, because it'll probably be hard for me to keep up with everything going on in the chat and make sure I get to the questions that you have for her, separate from building that community and talking with each other. So any questions for Chris, put in the Q&A. She has graciously said she will stick around at the end and answer any questions people have. So we won't be interrupting her presentation to do them live, but keep them coming in, and I'll keep them organized, and then we'll ask her at the end. Perfect, Chris. If you, and I should introduce myself. I am Erin Ellis. I am a member of one of the directors of Canadians for Homeopathy. I am myself a homeopath. I practice out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, but I do have a virtual practice, so I see people from all over. My practice is Similia Homeopathy, so you can find me at similiahomeopathy.ca, and of course Canadians for Homeopathy is at canadiansforhomeopathy.com. So Chris, if you want to give me the next slide, we'll introduce your presentation and you. Thank you. So we are, Chris is going to be talking all about agrohomeopathy for your garden, your life, and your land. So she's going to teach us how to give your plants and gardens a healthy option to assist with their growth, protect them from the never-ending pests, weather changes, and more. And Christina also, Christina White is, she's the CCH is a homeopathic educator and co-founder of Your Life and Land, an online community formed around the belief that our connection to each other and nature, real food, trees, plants, and animals, is critical to our physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Chris is a best-selling co-author of Wealth Codes, Sacred Strategies for Abundance. She offers workshops, learning circles, and individual homeopathic assessments for people, pets, and your plants. She is knowledgeable in agrohomeopathy, as it's known, a natural method of healing and protecting plants and agricultural resources from pests and disease. Chris offers educational resources for individuals, as well as customized programming for healers, natural practitioners, farms, and groups that want to understand how to use homeopathy in their own quest for true wealth, vitality, and wholeness. So I think, Chris, we've got a lovely, full, eager audience. So without further ado, we're going to let you take it away. And I'm going to pop off the screen and I'll be back at the end to move us into question and answer. And just a reminder again, if your question is for Chris and you want her expertise answer at the end, please pop that into the Q&A section, not the chat section. Thanks so much, and take it away, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Erin, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Agrohomeopathy is one of my favorite topics, as I was saying to you earlier. So I'm really excited that there's so many people that are interested in agrohomeopathy. Before I start the presentation, I did want to just give a little extra piece of how I came into agrohomeopathy. I originally started as a homeopath, and I started to really just use agrohomeopathy on my own plants at home. There's a picture here of roses actually that is in my yard. And then I started to also use homeopathy for animals. And then I had an opportunity, because I have horses, to go and actually work at a farm. And when I was at the farm, and it's a pretty large farm, offers CSAs here in the US and Massachusetts, we were finding he was doing organic practices as best he could, the farmer, and he was still having a lot of problems. And so he said to me that statement that quite a few people are familiar with in homeopathy: I'll try anything. And I was like, let me try homeopathy. And I started to really research the homeopathic remedies with his plants. And it was an incredible opportunity that he gave to us, because it allowed me to really see like day to day. And he had full crops. He had potatoes. You'll see a lot of the pictures in this presentation, but he had all of the different vegetables that we grow here in New England. You know, he was actually growing for his customers. And it was just a wonderful experience to be able to work there every day and see what was happening when I was providing the plants these different remedies, because that's one of the things, you know, it's newer agrohomeopathy. There is a fair amount of research, I think most of us would say, but there's still, it's still a kind of practice that you have to give remedies, see how they work. There's more to learn about it. So I just wanted to give you a little background as to where agrohomeopathy came from me. And it's been one of my biggest passions since I started to actually get into the opportunity of having, farms around me. We have a lot of farms here in Rochester, Massachusetts. So I have a lot of people I can talk to about their produce and, their farm animals itself. And that has just really allowed me, I should say, to, expedite kind of some of the things I've learned and see where homeopathy is just so powerful for us in the agricultural world. So that's the background. I'm going to start with the understanding that this is a class or a webinar for people that are not necessarily super knowledgeable or familiar with agrohomeopathy. So the first few slides are an intro of sorts for people that do have some experience with homeopathy. Agrohomeopathy is an inexpensive, chemical-free, non-toxic method of healing and protecting trees, plants, soil, the wildlife, and the agricultural resources from pest and disease. And one of the beautiful things about agrohomeopathy is it doesn't go and kill things, it deters. So it really allows our environment to be brought back into balance, which is same as we work with when we work in regular homeopathy. The solutions or remedies are made from natural resources such as plants and minerals. Many of our remedies are the same remedies we use for people and animals. Again, to me, a huge bonus for all of us that love homeopathy, because one kit can allow you to work with not only the people in your life and yourself, but it can allow you to work with animals and the plants. And we'll discuss a number of the remedies tonight. The remedies, again, are safe for you, your pets, the wildlife. In agrohomeopathy, the correct remedy will stimulate, similar to homeopathy, a restorative response in the tree, plant, or soil. And the energetic effect of the remedy disappears rapidly after application, leaving a healthier and more resilient plant that is completely safe to eat. And that was one of the big questions when I was working with some of the people in is this safe for the food, which as homeopaths, we know all the remedies are safe. And so it makes a really good beneficial option also for folks that are in organic farming or natural practices. There are endless ways we can use homeopathy in our gardens and on our land. And, it depends what you're looking to do. This is a picture actually of the farm that I was working at. We fertilize, we can improve a plant's health, increase the flower and the fruit yield, heal a damaged tree or branch. We deter the insects or wildlife. We stop things like powdery mildew, hair rust. I have some examples for you tonight of that. Tomato blight, leaf spot, and we can aid in the regrowth and transplanting or dividing of our plants. And one of the other beneficial pieces that I've been researching extensively is how we can improve the soil. And I'm still researching some of it, but I have found some things that have been very successful when we're planting seedlings, and I'll share that information with you guys tonight also. So in nature, it's the weakest of organisms, right, that are attacked and destroyed. Agrohomeopathy strengthens the plant's basic structure, allowing it to reach its optimum health, reducing and sometimes eliminating the ailment or the plant's susceptibility to pests and diseases. So I wanted to really make sure tonight that I shared pictures with you folks, because we can, as people that are homeopaths, we can tell people these things work. We can see how they work very gently sometimes, which sometimes when they do gently work, people say, well, that would have resolved itself on its own. So this is an example of a mulberry tree that's actually in my yard in July of 2021. And this is the same mulberry tree over to the right in June 2022. And the only thing that we did for this tree, we did do some trimming, but if you look to the left and you look to the right, you'll see the other thing that we did is we did calendula 200C and kelp carb 300C, which are two really powerful homeopathic remedies that can be used very simply. And I'll discuss also with you guys tonight how you can use the remedies in water and how we actually can disperse them in really large quantities if we want to. So you can actually give homeopathic remedies to a single plant, or you can actually use homeopathic remedies in full farms. And it just depends on, the right ratio of homeopathic remedy with the water and the source or the dispenser that you're using to actually disperse those remedies. So before we get into some more examples, I just want to discuss the three principles that we have in agrohomeopathy, which are the same fundamental principles that we have in homeopathy for people and animals. We have like cures like, or the law of similars. We have the minimum dose, and we have totality of symptoms. So I tried to break this down for everyone so you could see those three principles and how we apply them in agrohomeopathy. So in the law of similars, I picked the example of a homeopathic remedy called belladonna, which is actually a nightshade plant. And an example of the law of similars, or the like cures like principle, the plant has the following symptoms. The leaves turned reddish brown, which you can see on the left side, after a sudden cold, wet couple of days during the early summer. And that was back in June of 2022, you can see in the picture. The remedy belladonna has those same characteristics, or that symptom profile we'll refer to sometimes. And belladonna has red flushed. If you were actually looking at belladonna for a person, for example, they would have a red flushed face. They would have sometimes a fever. And the same principles that like cures like applies to a plant. So chilled from cold and then becoming overheated, or AKA flushed, as like a person's flushed on the face. We use this remedy to warm the soil and bring the plant back to balance. We are using the soil again this year, the remedy this year. We have some more tropical plants that we just wanted to actually plant around an area of our yard. And right now in the US, in the New England area, the temperatures, like most places right now, are up and down and all over the place. And we've been having a really hard time. And we used recently the belladonna homeopathic remedy. And these plants that want warmer weather, that have not necessarily had that up until a couple of days ago, we've seen an improvement with. So on the right side, though, is the same berry plant, June of 2023, so very recently. And the two remedies that I used is belladonna 200C and kelp carb 30C. And for folks that are familiar with homeopathy, one of the things that I find interesting with the belladonna and the kelp carb is belladonna and kelp carb is what's called the constitutional remedy for belladonna. Or if you were to give kelp carb to a person and then they had a fever, you may turn and look at giving them the remedy of belladonna. And again, if you're not familiar with homeopathy, I apologize, but I just wanted to point that piece out from the standpoint that these two remedies are complementary, I guess would be a good way to look at them. So the belladonna, though, for this plant moving forward, and actually I just looked at it the other day and was like, I think I might need to redose it this year, but I have not redosed that plant with belladonna since the June incident in 2022, and that's what it looks like today. So the minimum dose is the second principle that we use. Homeopathy states the smallest amount of the substance will bring about a restorative response. Homeopathic remedies are made with a specific process, which is called potentization, which is unique to homeopathy. Each remedy is made in a double distilled water and goes through a unique homeopathic process called dilution and succussion. This process of dilution and succussion, which is basically to keep it simple, vigorous shaking, and there is more to that process, but it's repeated at a specific increments and to create the potency or the strength of the remedy. Typically, the solution is then placed on a sugar pill. And there are some other ways that you can also dispense the homeopathic remedies. But for this conversation tonight, we typically use the actual pills or pellets, the homeopathic forms, because they're very easy to use and melt basically in your water dispensers and things like that. So they're wonderful for agriculture or gardens. We also, in the minimum dose, have the 30C and the 200C. Those are the typical homeopathic remedies that we'll use in agriculture. There are some people do use larger ones. I have it on a couple occasions, but for typical practice or end user home use, it's a really good idea to work with the 30Cs. And there are a couple of cases that we use some of the 200, but the 30C and the 200 are considered higher in potency and strength. And after the dilution and the succussion process, there isn't actually a lot of the original substance in a raw substance sense to the remedy. But where the power is actually the energetic value that serves as the catalyst to bring about the restorative response in the plant or the tree. So it's the same process that we follow with people or with animals. You're looking basically at your plant or your tree and you're matching it to a particular remedy, and you're looking at the entire plant or tree. And when you find that matching remedy, give the homeopathic remedy, you're going to see a restorative response in the plant or the tree. And what I find fascinating about agrohomeopathy is very often we'll give a remedy, will resolve an issue, but similar to homeopathy in animals and people, the overall vitality of that plant, as you saw actually in the mulberry example I gave you back a few slides, is very evident. And that's one of the things why we do a lot of taking pictures, because we really want people and ourselves to be able to gauge these results, because it's a little bit of a different process than other types of agricultural practices out there. I typically use 30C potencies for most cases and a few 200. We're finding that we are using, and most of you folks probably can relate to this because of the weather changes again, we're using a lot more of the 200 Cs because of the ups and the downs in the cold weather, hot weather, the sudden rains that are really torrential rains, and then we have those droughts and that dry. So I really think that homeopathy is going, or agrohomeopathy in particular, is going to really become very, very popular for us to use, because we don't know what to expect in a lot of cases because of the climate issues that we are seeing. So it's ideal for those types of things. And we'll discuss some of the examples further in tonight. Fungal and bacterial, we also tend to use higher doses. Those are, again, more ingrained usually in our plants, like when you see, and I'll show you examples of cedar rust and things like that. We also have mosaic on grapevines that we have a really good example of, but they're very, very deep rooted, right? They're systemic. So you have to actually sometimes do higher doses at a higher frequency. We use it for transplant and injury and wound care. So typically I stick with 30 Cs, and I find they're very, very effective. There are all different ways that we can do things as homeopaths, and that's not any different in agrohomeopathy. But for me personally, when I've been working with my clients and for ourselves, we've been using those pretty much a couple of times. I think we've used a couple of 1Ms, but primarily the 30 Cs and the 200 Cs, and we're seeing great success. The X potencies are the only other ones we do look at, which is the lower potency and strength technically, but they contain more of the small traces of the original substance. So a 6 potency we'll use for our seedlings, which I'll show you an example of, and we'll also use it for ongoing homeopathic fertilizer options. So we'll use it to fertilize our new seedlings, and then we will also use it to fertilize our soil in both our greenhouses and at some of the client projects that we have. So like in the practice of homeopathy for people and animals, the disease or the diagnosis is not the focus, right? In agrohomeopathy, we're considering, and this becomes interesting for people because you have to start to observe almost like a detective, which if for folks that are homeopaths on the call or folks that are familiar with homeopathy already with animals and people, we look at, right, the mentals, the physicals, and the emotionals. In plants, sometimes people say, well, how do you do that with a plant, Chris? We do the same thing. We follow the same process, really. We look to find what is causing the symptoms. We look to find how the symptoms are actually manifesting themselves. So back to that belladonna example, that plant was actually showing up symptoms of, the red, the flush, the belladonna state, where the symptoms are located and what makes the symptoms better or worse. So again, we go back to weather changes for better and worse and things like that. This picture that's on the left is an example I just wanted you folks to see of grapevines that we were working on to bring them back to a better space. This was a very difficult case because it was very deep rooted, the grapevines. But again, I'll get into that a little bit further on. But as an example, there are 4 steps of the observation. We have 1, the symptom of a spot. So you have your spots on the left side. The line, if there's a line, say in the plant itself, or lines, or like mosaic type pattern. We have the whole texture, the change, the color, the red. Nope, it's not red. This is brown and it has the pale green. So those colors are important to us. The brittle, limp, is there a wound? Was there a pest? Is there a discharge or a secretion? So those are all things that in this one picture, this one leaf, that we actually look at. Again, it ties very much back to if you're working with a person or you were working with an animal as a homeopath. So same steps of observation, same 3 principles of homeopathy. We also, the number 2 item is we look for the location. So the location of the problem. So we have the leaf, the stem, the roots, the whole plant, the soil. And so again, we have an example of the grapevines here. And then we have the event of what caused the problem: dehydration, waterlogging, transplanting, pruning, greenhouse practices, which is something we've been running across a lot lately, especially because, again, of trying to maintain temperatures in the greenhouses with the different weather changes, storm damage, other trees and plants in the area that host a disease, such as the cedar rust, exhaust, chemicals, cell towers, power lines. So all of those things, and it sounds probably like a pretty long list, but when you're literally looking at a plant that's at a farm or on your property, not only are you looking at the actual plant itself and looking at what you see, which was, we go back to our step 2, but you're also looking at what's going on around that plant. And also what's going around. One of the things that we have here very much in Massachusetts is we have a lot going on with the cedar rust. So if we have cedar trees, we have apple trees, we have pear trees, all of those apple and those pear trees are being impacted by the cedar rust. And a lot of times what we're told is very simply, well, you have to cut down all the cedar trees. And we don't want to do that. So we actually have been treating, and I'll show you guys some examples of that, but we've been using homeopathic remedies on both the fruit trees and the cedar trees to try again to bring things back into balance. But that type of situation also is going to warrant ongoing care, because the moment you have a cedar tree introduced into the area, or the challenges with the cedar tree and the cedar rust, then you have to make sure that you're actually applying those homeopathic remedies to anyone or any plant that's going to be impacted. Exhaust, cell towers, all of those things also play a factor. We have a dogwood tree that I didn't put in the slides, but I'll share briefly, that really is impacted by they're pretty sensitive plants. They're beautiful trees, but they're sensitive, and they're sensitive to exhaust. And so we've been working with that particular tree on different things. We've been using a remedy called phosphorus, which is a homeopathic remedy that's commonly used. And phosphorus has that symptom profile similar to a belladonna, where a phosphorus, or a plant that needs phosphorus, is sensitive to the environment, or extra sensitive to the environment. So just to give you some things to start to think about when you're looking at your plants or your trees or your farm or your homestead or your kitchen garden, you're looking at the whole picture. You're looking at the entire area around, not just that plant. The 4th thing we have is the things or the circumstances that make the symptom or the problem better or worse. So we have time, location, shade, heat, and again, the sudden temperature. The things or the circumstances and the events can sometimes kind of meld together, but the general understanding of this is that you just want to look at the entire picture, not just that one plant. You want to look at everything around it. You want to look at the condition of the plant from head to toe, or top to bottom, and then all the other plants around it to see what might be impacting it. So this grapevine case, unfortunately, we were not able to see the entire case through because we are no longer working at that particular farm any longer. They've changed their direction on what they're actually doing as far as produce. So, but this is one of the last pictures that I had. And as you can see here, it is not basically resolved completely, but with this grapevine, what we did do is we were using Cuprum metallicum 30C and Arnica 30C. We found multiple things were going on with this grapevine, and some of that was up for question with people. There's some leaf spot here. There's also, it had mosaic patterns on the actual grapevines. They also had a moth of some type that were on it. So there were multiple things that were actually going on, not even one one pest or one disease, which we know, right? If you have a plant that is weak or neglected or susceptible, then it's going to basically be a target for multiple things. Another issue that happened with this particular grapevine patch was they had terrible drainage there. So the water would actually all pool down at the grapevines, but then when it was drought, it would just dry up. And so we did find during the period of from 2020 to the summer of 2022, this is the leaf that I have in 2022. You saw some of the examples before. This is what they looked like in 2020. And a lot of that was basically due to the area that they were. So what we would do is we were treating a Cucumber metallicum for any fungal disease. And then we were treating with Arnica 30C, which is for pain and inflammation and overall healing. And there were a couple of other homeopathic remedies involved in here we also, I think, alternated over to Thuya, which is also for fungal, but we did them as a series. And what was also interesting about this particular case is you're not going to see something as serious as this resolve in one season. And so when you're using homeopathic remedies, just as if you were working with a plant or an animal or taking them for yourself, it isn't just going to go away magically overnight. You'll see certain symptoms improve, or you'll see certain symptoms, last less amount of time. Or for example, we found with this particular case that the grapes were the big signaler for us. So the grapes were getting healthier and healthier. And, in the beginning, when we were working, the grapes would just basically weren't even growing. And that was when I believe we actually did use the Thuya. And over those courses of those 2 seasons, we kept applying the different homeopathic remedies. And each season, as it was coming forward, we would see that the plant looked better and better. But unfortunately, we weren't able to see this one through. So I don't have a final picture of it for 2023. So when first planting seeds, we provide, I should say, Silica 200C to promote growth. And we also provide 200C when a plant has been neglected. Once the seedlings are up, we move into a fertilizer blend twice a week, which I'll discuss at the later on in this presentation. And in between, I return to just water only. And the Silica 200C worked so well. Like, this is a picture of actually our seedlings, and it did an amazing job. And the fertilizer, which we'll discuss, also helped. And these are organic plants. So one of the things I started to learn is I started to do organic growing, which has not been that long. It's only been probably about 4 years that we started doing actual organic plant growing. I learned very quickly how small and delicate and beautiful these plants are, but they're not, they haven't been genetically modified. They're not going to grow big and huge, like right from the beginning. They do grow really well, as you can see in this picture, but it was a lesson for me as someone that was not growing in previous years to kind of see the difference in the organic plants, and also see that they are going to be, in the beginning at least, more susceptible to some of the temperatures, the weather changes, and things like that, because they have not been genetically modified. So again, I think homeopathy comes into play here in such a wonderful way, because we can use organic plants, but we now have a solution, a natural homeopathic solution, to help the plants actually be able to excel and get stronger and stronger, even if they're dealing with droughts, even if they're dealing with the wet weather, which we ran into that a lot with tomato blight. And that's another thing we'll discuss a little bit about. We have remedies for that also. This is an example of tree damage. So this is when we used a remedy called calendula, and we used 30C and 200C, or you can use, 30C or 200C. I used 200C on this particular tree. And so you can see to the left, and of April 2022, there was an enormous crack in the tree, which, for full disclosure for everyone, if you look, there's a stump or a limb up above. And what was happening was the tree was just splitting down the middle, and we really did not want to lose the tree. And so we had, some come in and they removed that top. So yes, the tree is going to have less pressure on it. But if you look at the picture, and I just took this picture for you folks yesterday, because I really wanted to see folks to see how significantly the actual wound healed. So typically, in my mind, when I've looked at other trees and you see that trees have split, yes, they will, kind of tend to come back and fuse somewhat, but not to the extent that we've seen with this tree. And so we did Calendula 200C, only 2 applications. I watered the base and I sprayed the trunk. This is a pretty big tree, so as you can see with the bird feeder, I couldn't get all the way up. So I did have a sprayer and I did spray, but I only did that application twice. And this is what the tree looks like today. And you'll also notice right above that we have new growth. The pear trees and cedar rust. So we have a lot of cedar on our property. We have a lot of cedar in the area. We have a lot of clients tell us about problems with apple trees and pear trees. And again, it is not an easy process. It takes some time depending on how long that apple or pear trees have been left the way they are. So you'll see on the left, this is actually, I apologize. On the left, that's actually the leaf from this year. And my dates are flipped, guys, so I apologize. June 18th, 2000 the pictures should just be switched over. It's 2022 where you see the deformed pears, and then 2023, you now see that spot, which is the cedar rust. But what we're seeing is we're having less and less and less of it. And we actually do not have any deformity on our actual pears as of right now. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't. I have been finding over the last couple of years that with the pears, as we've been applying the Thuya 20C, and then we've been applying Cuprum 30C, which is the orange color you see for the cedar rust. And Cuprum 30C will also promote growth. And then we've been applying Calcarea carbonica 30C, which promotes growth and fruit production. So the fruit trees, we've been working on these trees for probably about earlier than 2022, probably about 2021. But each year we're seeing less and less of the deformity. And I apologize, I should have had another picture of the fruit for you. But that was last year. This year, we do not have the black that you see in the rotting and the deformity of the pears. But when we first purchased the property, everyone told us to cut the pear trees down because they said, there's no way you're going to bring them back. There's no way you're ever going to get rid of the cedar rust or any of these problems. And also because we have cedar trees on the property. And so we every single year have been doing this protocol, and we have been seeing each year that they're looking healthier and healthier and healthier. And again, if you have a tree that has had this problem for a long time, and you're not basically removing the obstacle to cure, we call it, which would be, say, the cedar trees, then you do need to be patient. But it's been very evident to us that we're seeing more growth. We're seeing less of the actual orange spots, of the cedar rust. We're seeing more from the kelp carb. We're seeing more fruit on the pear trees, and we're seeing from the Thuya and the Cuprum that the deformity of the pears is not happening. So if you have fruit trees, I highly recommend you try this because I think it's something that if you try yourself, you'll see a definite improvement, and you'll be able to really be patient and want to keep moving forward with it. This is an example of one of our clients who has a greenhouse with beautiful rosemary. They will be beautiful again, but some of these plants that she has are 30, 40 years old. And so in April of 2023, what happened, we had been working with these earlier for a fungal infection, but this past April, on the left, you'll see the picture, she actually had a situation where she was away and the greenhouse was not protected, so they did not put down coverage over the rosemaries, and we had a lot of the cold snaps going on. And so as you can see on the left side, she had quite a bit of damage done to the rosemaries. So she had reached out to me and she was like, Kresh, she's like, I know we were working on the fungus issue that they had. And she's like, but now this is what happened. And she's like, I don't think we're going to ever bring these back. And so I went out and I actually applied Carbo Veg 30C, which I found every day. I have to tell you guys that I am, and anyone that's on the webinar that uses homeopathy, I think you would probably agree that I'm always just a tiny bit surprised. And not that I believe in homeopathy, obviously, I think it's wonderful, but I am always delighted and just slightly like, wow, like look what it can do. Look really what can happen. She was considering actually pulling them all out and finally giving up. And I was like, let's just do the Carbo Veg 30C and see what we have. And in just a month, so this is a left and a right. On the right, that is a close-up. It's the same area that you're looking on the left, but you're just walking around towards the front of it. And on May 26th, after giving the carbo in April, on April 27th, this is what they look like. I'm actually scheduled to go back out there next week. I was kind of hoping I'd get there before this presentation so I could give you guys a better, even a more current picture. We moved on on May 26th, we moved on and I actually applied, instead of applying Carbo Veg again, because it did what it needed to do, we now basically applied Cuprum Metallicum 30C. And I did have her, when you look to the right, you'll see those really brown spots. And she said to me, should I cut them now? And I said, yes, because on the left, when I first went out there, she was like, I can't prune these. They'll be dead. There's nothing to prune because they were in just such a bad shape. And I said, don't prune anything. Back in April, I said, let's do the Carbo Veg 30C. Let's see what happens. And then in May, when I went back out, I said, okay, those aren't coming back where you see the brown. I said, so now it's time for us to prune the dead wood that we see, because that's only going to take away the energy of the plant's ability to try to kind of keep growing. And so when I left on May 26th, she was going to prune the brown, and I had sprayed the Cuprum Metallicum 30C, and we're reassessing, like I said, next week. One of the original things that was going on with these rosemaries were they had a fungus, and they also had fungal gnats. And so they've been through a lot, which is probably one of the reasons that they basically, when they had the cold snap, really just failed again. And so again, we go and we look at a plant in this particular case, right? And if the plant is in a space where it's already susceptible because it has an infection, it has a bacterial infection, and then all of a sudden you have a cold snap, it's no surprise that it's going to just be like, I don't have enough. So a Carbo Veg 30C, which is the corpse reviver, revived these rosemaries to a place that they no longer want to pull them. But this will be an ongoing process. Like she asked me, she's like, how many more times do you think? And we're going to do the cuprum, and then we'll probably do the petroleum, because there, like I mentioned earlier, there are multiple things going on with this rosemary. These rosemaries, this particular client has 6 greenhouses that have olive rosemary in all of them. And what did happen for them is they had cross contamination between some of the scissors and things that they were cutting with. And that's what that's what actually caused the initial problem. This is an example of the striped beetle. Everyone probably knows this if you're a gardener and you have squashes and cucumbers. And again, Cuprum Metallicum, if you needed a remedy in your garden, I have to say, and this surprised me when I first started doing agrohomeopathy, but Cuprum Metallicum has been amazing. It's so helpful for growth. It's helpful for the fungus, the bacterial. It's helpful for the insects. And what's really fascinating about this, again, for folks that are a little bit more familiar with homeopathy, is when we apply the Cuprum Metallicum to this particular situation, which we had both zucchini issues with the striped beetle, and then we also had issues with the striped beetle on the cucumbers. And you can see on the right side that gnawing on the cucumbers. So it didn't destroy the cucumbers, or it wasn't destroying the cucumbers. But again, this was at the farmer's, the farmer's actual product for his CSA, and CSA members do not want, all sorts of marks on their food and things like that. So he was not happy about that at all. And they were all over these plants. And what happened is we gave it Cuprum Metallicum 30C. I sprayed the entire field. That was one of the first pictures you saw. That was the field that we did quite a bit of our work in. And when we sprayed it, like 3 days later, I saw the farmer, and he said to me, I don't know what to say. He said, because, I always was kind of a little bit on, like, did it work? Because it's fairly new, some of these things. And he said, they're still there, but it's less, and they're moving slow. And I was very like, they're moving slow. And he said, yes, they're moving slow. He goes, it's the strangest thing, Chris, because these types of beetles are this, they're really fast. They fly really fast. They actually bite. So they'll land on you. And like when I was spraying, they were even coming after me. And he said, there aren't as many, and they are not damaging the plants as they were. And what's really fascinating is Cuprum metallicum has that symptom profile. So the characteristics of the remedy of sluggishness and slowness, mental slowness, typically if you were working, say, with a person. And so when we gave this remedy, it didn't kill the beetles, but it slowed them down. So it slowed down the damage that they were doing. And that's something that I'm still researching for folks that are doing agrohomeopathy. I'd love the feedback on that or what people have seen. But that's what we saw with this particular case of using Cuprum metallicum. And so again, that was definitely an eye opener. And it was a fun experience for me with this particular farmer, because he really didn't necessarily in the beginning believe in homeopathy. So it was a really neat way for him to see it and see it visually, and then really start to understand what was happening. Another really great remedy is Thuya 200C. We typically will use for this, and that's the bell pepper for brown rot. And so again, you have that deformed vegetable. So if you go back to the pear tree that I gave you folks an example of when we would use Thuya, it's the same thing. It's when you're having that fungus, the deformed vegetable, the deformed fruit. And again, there are tons of diseases out there. I have not learned all the diseases yet, and I hope there's enough time for me to figure that all out, but I don't know. But what is nice about homeopathy is you don't necessarily have to know the name of the disease. You don't necessarily have to know every single condition or disease. You just need to be able to observe that plant. Like we talked about in the beginning, you just need to look at it. If you're someone that likes to do homeopathy for yourself or your kids or your animals, you look at the whole picture. And so it's not so much about the condition we care about, it's about how that plant looks. And so this plant, for example, has the deformed vegetable, the brown rot, which is caused by the rain. So we had really hot, humid and rain. And then this particular field was also very deficient, the soil. So we did both Thuya 200C and Magphos 6X, and his peppers actually all started to recover. Not all of them, but he did not lose all of them. And then we stayed on top of the remainder of his peppers. And that's what we used during that particular season. I think this was probably 3 years ago, if I recall. And so again, we were using some of these remedies preventatively, which I know that sometimes folks will say in homeopathy, well, we only treat what we see. But I feel that with what's going on with our climate and with what's going on with all of the insects and the pests that are coming into all over the world, right? Because we have so much of plants going to different places, native, non-native plants. We have insects coming in. We have all sorts of issues where insects are surviving places where they shouldn't because of the weather, and being introduced from other countries. And so I am beginning to work a lot more from a preventative side. And I usually use the 30 Cs, I will say, for the preventative, but I've been trying to do more of that, because if I know this plant is susceptible to something like that, because I'm watching the rain or I happen to see an insect that I know is going to be a problem, then for a large farm like we were working at here, we found that you couldn't wait to treat. You had to prepare. And that was the way that we kept on top of the majority of the crops and had really a great level of success across the board, where in previous years he would lose things, he would lose rows and rows of plants because of weather, because of blight. And there was nothing he could do to stop it, even from some of the organic practices out there. And homeopathy was able to do that. And the reason we use the magnesium phosphorus 6X, right? So that's more of the soil, that's more of the raw substance, was the peppers, and in particularly again in this particular field, but I find this with peppers in general, we'll have a lot of they'll get very pale and yellow. So when I see pale and yellow in any plant, actually, I will actually look and consider using magnesium phosphorus 6X. So for folks new to agrohomeopathy, this is as simple as you can start here. I wanted people to see that because it's that easy. 1 pellet per cup of water is what I use. I use a number 3 size pellet. There are different sizes of pellets out there. You'll see that if you're ordering kits, but I like the number 3. It's kind of bigger than a grain, but smaller than a little ball for folks that are familiar with homeopathy. And I use only 1 pellet per cup and it works. There are different practices out there. Some people will say you need more. You may in certain cases, but I find that practice works for me. And I basically just go up, from cup to cup to cup in my calculation. And when you look at that from a consumer side, and you look at that, like if you're a farmer or someone that's really trying to grow large quantities, these remedies are really inexpensive and extremely powerful and can really be used from small, this little container, all the way up to, I should have taken a picture of the tractor we had with the big container on the back of it. I apologize, but you can go all the way up to that scale. So if you're working from a garden side though, kitchen garden, new at this, all you need is something even smaller than this, a glass, anything wooden or plastic we like in homeopathy. We tend to stay away from, or I would not use, I should say, metal. And you don't want to use anything that is chemical in it prior to this. You really want to use, a lot of times people will say that are very conscious of throwing things away. They're like, can I recycle my Windex bottle? I'm like, no. So don't recycle. I mean, you really want to use something is clean, and you want to designate it for homeopathy. And that's really the only thing you do need to do though, which is pretty neat. And when you clean in between, sometimes people will say, well, do I need to clean with soap and water in between homeopathic remedies? You do not, at least in my experience. All I use is warm water and rinse it out, and then you're fine. So use glass or plastic, clean containers, designate and label containers. I do always recommend that to people because like anything, you want to make sure people know what's in the actual containers. And spring water or filtered water isn't very practical for most of us. It's ideal. We sometimes will recommend that for folks that are working with people that are extra sensitive or animals that are extra sensitive. But we use well water here. Most of our clients locally have well water. That's what we use. And we find that we have success. So when we talk about agrohomeopathy and we talk about frequency, and this is something that varies, and for folks that are familiar with agrohomeopathy, there are multiple practices out there. I'm open to hearing about all the different ways too, because I don't think one way is right. I think there's many ways for us to do some of these things, and in some cases, it's probably a good idea, to kind of change that up, I should say. So what I do that works is we'll usually see a correct remedy will have a positive effect within 24 to 72 hours. And what we find is they just look better. So sometimes people will say to me, well, the insect is still there. And I always ask, well, does the plant look better? Does the plant have less insects on it? You want to look again, as I spoke of earlier, you want to look at the entire picture. You want to look at the entire plant. You do have to have some patience. It is not the same from say conventional spray where you spray and you look and all the insects are dead. That is not what you're going to see usually. Usually what you will see is it'll be less, or you'll see that they've moved away. And again, that's what we're working to do. We're working to actually deter the pests. We're working to strengthen the plants. We're looking to deter, the diseases and the different things that the plant may be susceptible to. And the best way to do that is working with homeopathy to bring that plant to its optimal health. Because if it's in its optimal health, it will not be a target for all of these other things. So if the plant looks better in general, or the number of insects is less, I recommend you wait. If you feel it's the correct remedy, I also encourage you to wait as long as even a week, even if you only see a slight improvement before repeating. And again, as you start to work with agrohomeopathy and folks that use agrohomeopathy or, even home users that use homeopathy now, you've learned that we want to be patient, because once you give a remedy that is the catalyst to rebalance that plant, you want to allow that remedy to move forward. You want to allow that plant to assimilate the actual energetic value it's receiving. And if you continue to just hammer it with a homeopathic remedy, you can actually stop that progress. And if you continue to give too much, technically, you can actually make that plant worse. And again, that takes some effort to do, so I don't want people to be afraid, but you can have these different circumstances where, it's very true in homeopathy, less is more for us. Minimum dose is what we want to do, which makes it awesome, right? Makes it absolutely awesome for us from a cost standpoint, from a time standpoint. For farmers, for example, that was one of the things that was wonderful when we were working that way, because there was no way we could treat plants multiple times every day or every other day. We had to actually put down our applications and have faith. And by the time I would get back, which would be about a week sometimes, the plant would look better, the issue would be resolved, or there might be something else that needed to be addressed. Excuse me. So I'm not saying to ignore, but I am saying that if you start to get some experience in some of these remedies and you find they work, trust they're working, and don't try to kind of interject more because, well, they look better, so I'm going to give it even more. Your best thing to do would be to wait. And I find that, the plants that I ignore or I'm too busy to actually return to, whether it's from client standpoint or farming or here at our property, I'm usually very, very happy that I did so, because I find that I walked away, let it do what it needed to do, and they've improved. And now you might find, though, if nothing is shifted, or say the situation is worse. So if you have a really serious condition or an infestation or something like that, I'm not saying ignore it for a week, but allow yourself to really go back and look. And if the infestation is less, or the plant overall looks stronger, or whatever the condition is, you can kind of look at it and say, no, I'm gonna give it another day. Then let yourself do that. Now, if you give a remedy and you look and you're like, oh, that is not the right remedy, you are going to know that. And then it's time for you to move on to another remedy. And the beautiful thing about homeopathy is we do have multiple remedies for the same condition. So you have choices. So when you're applying homeopathic remedies, you want to avoid spraying the leaves if they already have like a fungus or a mildew challenge. That's what I do. I find that I have better results when I do that. If you're dealing with a pest or some type of, the worms or whatever that might be, especially if it's under the leaves, I do find that I will spray as long as the plant doesn't have any type of fungal or bacterial piece. And that has been more helpful for us when we've done that. With that said, I always encourage people spray when it's not direct sun. Like, you don't want to spray and then have rain, because you do run into also that if you spray and then it immediately follows, we have rain, I will reapply. I will say that when I spray and say it rains like the next day, if I've been actually watering the root of the plant, because I'm trying to work, say, on like a bacterial case or something like that, I don't feel the need to go and reapply that remedy at that point, because I've given it to the base. I know that it's gone down to the roots, and I know that the plant has received that. But in cases when you're trying to, say, work with, there's a remedy out there called camphor, which is really helpful to spray on plants to deter if you have deer. It will work for that. We've seen it work for up to about 3 weeks. I have found it has been successful, but I will say that if it rains in between, we will find that they come back. The deer will come back quicker. And we were using camphor for pumpkin plants over at the farm last season, I think it was, and we were finding that application was working and it was positive. But if we did have rain, we also decided to reapply. Water around the base of the tree or plant at the root ball is the best way to kind of make it reach the root, especially if you're trying to deal with something that's systemic, such as the fungal, the bacterial, and things like that. That's what we do with the pear trees, the apple trees. We'll spray both the leaves and the root and the bark. But again, if I spray the leaves, because of the fungal piece, I make sure that I've done it on a very warm, not humid, but warm day, that it's going to get air and it's going to dry quickly. So where do you store your homeopathic remedies for folks that are interested in purchasing some kits and things like that? You can store the kit or in any leftover solutions. So say you had a solution in that picture, that canister, the dispenser, in a cool place out of the direct sunlight. The solution can be sealed, and I typically use my solutions for up to 5 days. I don't have any hard proof that past that they're not effective. So again, feedback on that would be awesome. But we're finding that 5 days is a safe space, that we're finding they're still effective. And frankly, I go through them pretty quickly. So 5 days for me works fine. And usually for the clients too, even in the larger containers, when we were using those, we found that we would try to, we actually tried to time when we were spraying, because we wanted to spray when it was warm enough, but not expecting rain. And then we wanted to make sure we had like 2 days if we needed to hit large areas, because we were using the large containers that go on the back of the actual tractors. Shake the solution between each use before applying. So no matter what you're using, if it's a glass or it's the dispenser. And that's some of the basics of homeopathy or agrohomeopathy, how we basically look at our plants or the trees. I do think sometimes people are surprised when I tell sometimes people will say to me like, oh, well, plants I can see, but trees. So anything outside you can use homeopathy for. As we, animals, we do a lot of wildlife work, actually. We do a lot of work in agriculture. So, the animals at farms, all plants, anything can benefit from homeopathic remedies. And so it's pretty powerful, because you can take, if you're someone that has a home that has a lot of animals or has a lot of plants and trees, you really can improve your entire environment around you for not only your food source, but for your wildlife, for your pets, so that you're not spraying pesticides, you're not spraying the trees with pesticides, you're not spraying the grasses and things like that. If you're using the homeopathic remedies, you will find things will be greener. Things will be growing fast. We've seen it time and time again. You can use these homeopathic remedies too inside really quick. I'll mention that. So that sprayer that you had on the slides before, we live in a pretty old home, farmhouse, and we actually spray. We have all sorts of creatures. That's part of a farmhouse, and that's cool, but sometimes you don't want them, that close. And so we actually spray homeopathic remedies. We spray camphor. We also spray sulfur, and that actually helps us. Both of those help us with, we have stink bugs here. They're very popular. We have hornets. We have mice. We have, pretty much anything that flies. You can use the camphora or you can try the sulfur. Those are the two big ones that we have found a lot of success with. And what's beautiful about it is it's water. So, you can actually spray that in areas that you wouldn't want to spray chemicals to try to get rid of these things. And we'll spray it up in our attic. We'll spray it around the windows. We'll spray it down in the basement. But you can spray them anywhere. If you have ant issues in the kitchen, you can do things like that. Okay, so I'd like to just share some general homeopathic remedies. I have a pretty good list here for you folks, and then we can take questions and things like that to see what is of interest to people. But arnica, we apply to any new plant introduced into the garden after pruning, damage, dividing, breakage, and transplanting. Then arnica will promote root growth, healing, and circulation of the plant. And I'm always fascinated by it because it's very true. A lot of people know arnica, no matter what level of homeopathy you may know. A lot of people will buy the arnica gels for themselves. A lot of people will use them for their animals. And it's the same thing for the plants, and you will see the same type of things. Like if a plant has been damaged because you brought it home and it fell over in the car, arnica is the first thing that we would look at. Calendula promotes root regrowth and healing. And so we did on that tree, and I'd be willing, no, I don't think we did actually, sorry, I'm thinking out loud, folks. But I was thinking of the tree that had the split. And we actually didn't do arnica. We only actually did the 2 doses of the calendula. But what's interesting about that, when you saw the slices and the wound in the tree, one of the things that's very significant about calendula is that if you have an injury on your hand and you have an open wound, once it's clean, right, you're going to actually, if you were someone that uses homeopathy, you're going to take a dose of calendula, or you might use a calendula cream. Again, you want to make sure that the wound on the person is clean, because the calendula will actually seal that wound. Well, that's exactly what happened with that tree. And we've done that with we have a couple of clients that had damaged apple trees they've been given actual calendula to the old apple tree. Someone had decided to start to cut it down, and they changed their mind, thankfully. And that's what she's been actually giving to the tree. And I'm sure she's probably also given it arnica, but it will actually, these 2 remedies will help with pain and inflammation for arnica. And then calendula will help with actually closing the wounds. So you can provide any plant that looks weak after arnica, a week after, I should say. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Provide any plant that looks weak after arnica, the calendulas for the roots. So the 2 of them can be interchanged. Sorry about that. I'm reading my slide incorrectly. Silica is for weak, neglected, dry plants. So the plants will look limp and dry even shortly after watering, or always appear to be droopy. And so any plant that you see that you know, the entire plant you can look at and you're like, it looks dry, the soil looks dry, the plant looks dry, the leaves are drooping, you can give silica to. Petroleum is another nice one that's great for plants that look dry, cracked, or have been overwintered in cold temperatures or lack of sunlight. So again, if you were to give the silica and didn't see good results, and you looked at the plant and it matched what I just stated for the petroleum, that would be the second remedy that I would try. We use petroleum actually quite often, and that was, I think I mentioned on the rosemary plants, but we use that a lot for scale. And that has been phenomenal for helping us, for clients and ourselves, when we've seen any type of scale. The petroleum is the remedy that seems to do the best work for the plants. So arnica and calendula for natural pesticides for bacterial damage, rot, fungal. You can do leaf curl from stress on the plant, it's damaged, give arnica followed by calendula 48 hours. Again, people will vary on when they give these remedies, but arnica and calendula are complementary to one another. So certain remedies that we have, some of them are complementary, some of them are not. And if they're not complementary, you can actually antidote the effect of the previous remedy, which means you stop or negate the effect. So keep that in the back of your mind, but I've provided you guys here when I say that you can use these guys together. These are remedies that are actually complementary with each other. So arnica and calendula are used very often together. Camphora, I mentioned earlier, as far as the spray for the bugs and such. It's actually also a remedy that we will spray our plants that we bring into our property, because we buy, you buy things at the nursery, friends give you things, all of them have creatures on them. So we always try to practice actually spraying camphora and almost quote unquote quarantining the plant just briefly, and I usually will quarantine or just try to keep it away from everything else for at least a couple of days. I am not always successful with that, I have to admit. But I do think it's a good practice because it will actually help to mitigate anything that's on the plant and get rid of that as you bring it into the environment, your environment. So you're not bringing other things in that you don't want. It's also used though for fungal coatings. You'll have that symptom profile, right, of sticky honey drops, often from aphids. You can use camphora, leaf damage from excessive sunlight. So each remedy that we're talking about, or I'm speaking of here, I've given you descriptions of them. This is not a full extensive how these remedies can be used, but it gives you a starting place to just start thinking about things when you're looking at your plants, looking at the farm, looking at your homestead and your gardens, and what remedies can you use? And then you can come back to this information and give some of these things a try. Cuprum metallicum, again, one of my favorites. Brown rot, leaf rot, blight on plants, the fruit trees and the vines we talked about, powdery and downy mildew, fungal infections after periods of cold. One of the things you'll see in some of these remedies is some of them will speak to after cold, and some of them will speak to after warm. And that, again, as we talked about earlier, each remedy has a unique profile. Each plant might have like a fungal infection, for example. But one of the things you want to be careful of, or just be aware of, is when you're picking a remedy, well, what caused it? What caused the fungal infection? If you're able to assess that, was it the hot weather or was it the cold weather? And when you're trying to decide between remedies, this gives you a nice way to decide that if it's periods of cold, I might try Cuprum metallicum. If it's periods of warm rain, I might try Natrum sulfurica or Natrum sulfurica. So you've got blight, leaf curl, brown rot, powdery or downy mildew, damp, warm weather, lengthy periods of warm rain. So those two remedies can be used for the same quote unquote condition or symptoms. But you now know by looking at them, well, what caused that? And we do care about what causes that. That's going to give you more successes quicker if you stop and actually not only pick a remedy based on, its leaf spot, but well, how did it get leaf spot as best as you're able to actually identify, or how did it get the powdery or downy mildew? Was it related to the warm rain or the cold rain? And if it was, now you can look at Cuprum or you can look at Nat Sulf. Thuya, again, also very much one of my favorites. And I find that I go between Cuprum and Thuya quite often. But again, if I'm catching it because of warm rain, then it's going to be Thuya. If it's cold rain, then I might be looking at Cuprum. If I don't know, I am, as I mentioned earlier in some of the cases I've shared with you, I'm going to alternate if I'm not seeing the results that I want to see, but I'm giving myself, pretty significant time between giving those remedies so I can really kind of address that, or I can observe that, I should say. Bombyx. Bombyx is one of the first remedies that I was introduced to that actually got me into agrohomeopathy, because the problem that we had over at the farm I mentioned in the beginning was he actually had the tomato hornworms, which you guys, I don't think I put a picture in, which surprises me, but for you folks that know the tomato hornworms, they're enormous. Or they can be, and they can take down rows and rows of tomato plants really quickly. And that was a very big product that this particular farmer wanted. And that was one of the things he said to me, is he's like, if you can get rid of the tomato hornworms, I'll be sold. And so we did the Bombyx remedy, and it was pretty powerful. It was pretty amazing. It definitely significantly brought down the number of tomato hornworms. And for this, for the farmer to actually say that to me, I know it did. And it didn't get rid of all of them. I have to tell you guys that. I don't want to tell you that it's a complete miracle worker, but it can significantly reduce them. And then you do have to reapply it on occasion to deter them. But it was our best course of action. And it was really interesting because it was when we first started doing the agrohomeopathy at this farm, it was the first time he said that he hadn't lost so many of his tomato plants, because, to try to go through and to pick the hornworms off because he followed organic practices, he didn't spray, was near to impossible when you're talking about hundreds of tomato plants. And so that was pretty cool. We did find, because homeopathy, again, it's not going to kill the hornworms, it's going to deter them, that once we sprayed the tomato plants, we then had to spray the peppers, because they were right next door. They were the row over. And so I actually had a rotation where I would actually spray there were hundreds and hundreds of plants in this particular project. I would spray them with Bombix and make sure that I sprayed everything around the tomatoes that I knew the tomato hornworms would like. Because again, they'll have a preference. They're going to go for the tomatoes first, but if they don't want the tomato because they don't like that, they're deterred by the Bombix, then they would go over to the pepper plants. But once we did that, we found that we successfully were able to keep them pretty much at bay. I mean, again, they would crop back up and I would spray again. So that's an interesting remedy. That's not one you're going to find in a typical homeopathic kit, because it's, to the best of my knowledge, it's only used in agriculture. But it is one you can get at most of the homeopathic pharmacies. I'm pretty sure I've ordered it at most of them. So you can check that one out if anyone has that problem. Again, camphor we talked about on the pest control. And then simiconfuga is an interesting homeopathic remedy that we use on aphids on roses. And so that is a really good remedy for folks that have any of the rose issues. And we're back over to our cuprum. And so again, people that have potato plants, Cuprum metallicum was a really good one that we used for the potato beetle. Is definitely one that I would throw out there, that if you, again, you can pretty much use Cuprum metallicum, I have found, on any of the plants that there are insects that have a problem with any type of insects. I haven't seen any ill effects in providing the Cuprum metallicum kind of across the board. Like we use it on eggplant, on squash, cucumber, potato, the wine vines. We use it on the fruit trees. So we use it as a general natural pesticide on a periodic basis. Because again, I find that if we're waiting for it to happen, if you're working at any scale on trying to grow even in your own homes, it's very difficult to kind of wait till you see it, because by the time we see it, unless you're checking every underleaf of every plant, it's usually already there. So I have tried to really encourage my clients, and for myself and for the farms, to actually periodically create some of these programs. Helix we use for slugs. We don't have a ton of slugs around here, but I wanted people to know about that one. That's a very popular one for slugs and very effective. Petroleum, scale, and mealybugs. Sulfur is great for insect infestations, anything that crawls, flies, moths, aphids, ants, beetles, cabbage, eggplant, squashes, cucumber, the cantaloupe, and the potato. The moth, the cabbage moth, we use the sulfur for, and we have found success with that. And we also use sulfur for tomato blight. I'm just thinking through my mind there because I didn't include that one on there, but we do use that one for tomato blight also. Aconite. Aconite is a really interesting remedy. It's made from a poisonous plant called aconite. And it's interesting because we use it a lot with the cold. So we had a really great example of a batch of basil that we were growing in a small greenhouse, where we had left the door open and the weather again, kept changing. This is a few seasons ago, and it came in, and basically we had the cold, dry wind. And it was really kind of out of the blue, and it took all of the basil and put that, for folks that grow basil a lot, you get that bluish, grayish spots on them. And that is from the cold, dry wind. And what's fascinating about aconite is if you're going to give that to a person or an animal, or a person has a cold after coming in from a cold, dry wind, we typically will tell a person, try aconite. If a person or an animal goes through any type of shock, we will also consider aconite. So this again is an example for you guys to see, like, these remedies are all remedies that we use in general homeopathy, with people and animals. And these are remedies in one kit that you can have and use across the board. And again, if you start to kind of become a bit of a detective for yourself as far as when you're learning remedies, well, did the plant suffer from cold? It did. Let's look at aconite. We just had a particular, I can't remember the specific case, but there was, again, we had the cold wind. We've had a lot of the cold come in, and it was the first remedy that I recommended was give the plant a dose of the aconite. And so I think that remedy is also going to become very important to us in agriculture because we are going through so much of these extreme changes. Arnica is damage after hail, storm, or wind, signs of breakage, broken stalks, limbs, promotes healing. And then belladonna. So belladonna was way back in the beginning of the presentation, right? That was the one that had the spots, the reddish brown spots. So the plant wilts quickly and the leaves turn reddish brown or red spots from long, cold, wet summers. Symptoms are sudden, and the remedy acts as a source of heat and will warm the plant. And that one has come through for us time and time again. So these three remedies, though, what they have in common is they're all from sudden types of events, right? So if you're working in, gardening, and we have those weather dips, and we have these colds and these heats that we're looking at, these are the remedies that I would first look at when you're considering. You're not talking about bacterial infections. You're not talking about fungus, right? Those are our thuyas and our cuprums. You're talking about, wow, we just had a hailstorm. And, and like I said, with the basil, we had put that in the greenhouse, and like we had just left the door open, and that's what happened to it. And we applied the aconite and it ended up being fine. I apologize because I usually throw that picture in, and I didn't have it before. I have a before and after, but what would have been lost, recovered and came back, and, grew, and we were able to actually have that produce for the season. Nat sulf is consequences again from damp, warm weather. So now when you're looking at, well, I've got damp, warm weather, would nat sulf be something I would look at? Well, if that's what you're, if it's damp and it's warm, then yes. If it's cold, again, it might be the cuprums and some of those other things. Petroleum is from severe cold and frost. Look for cracking. That's a very big, what we call characteristic or keynote in homeopathy, that's caused by the cold, and plants that have received too little sunlight during winter. And then zincum metallicum is consequences from sudden cold or lengthy periods of cold. And it is helpful for weak plants to regenerate. I haven't used zincum metallicum as of yet very often, so I don't have any specific examples, but I was researching some of these other ones earlier in the season, and that one caught my eye. And again, because of all of these changes in the temperatures, I think it's important for us to have these because we can then give them to the plants. And if you're growing or just love your plants, then you have some solutions. Okay, so natural germination and fertilizer, that's our silica that we talked about earlier. The 1 dose of the 200C is what we do. And then I mentioned to you guys the fertilizer that we use. And again, some folks will say that we shouldn't really mix some of these remedies. And, for me, this is one that I do mix, and I find that we have positive results because these remedies are actually complementary. But again, that's kind of a personal choice for you guys. I find I have not had any ill effects with using the calc carb, the caliphos, and the magphos together. If that's not something you want to do, you can give the plant 72 hours between the remedy applications. That's something you can also do. So I wanted to include that. But what we find is, again, if you're working with large scale of produce, which we were, and a lot of our clients are, that we don't have that luxury to go back around. So I've looked at caliphos, magphos, calc carb. I have found that they are complementary in the research that I've done. And so I feel comfortable in using those. But it's something for you guys to consider for yourself. Caliphos is, on its own is great for plants that look strong at the time of purchase, but fail shortly after. And then apply after calc carb as a fertilizer protocol. So that was what I just mentioned on the previous screen. Magphos, great for plants that fail after a cold spell and will tend to see yellowing. That's what I mentioned to you guys earlier. And we find magphos is very, very helpful for tomato and pepper plants. And then apply after caliphos if you were doing it as a protocol. So I gave you guys that protocol sequence. You can either do it as a combo, but if you're not comfortable with combinations, then you can also choose, to do the 3 of those and just separate it by the 72 hours or more. In some cases, people might say that you actually want to do more. So again, I think you have to kind of look at, as you start to explore more about agrohomeopathy, one of the nice things about agrohomeopathy too is, especially if you're a home gardener, is you can test some of these things and you're not, you're not overly concerned that you're going to quote unquote damage the plant, right? You may not get the effect that you want, but you're not going to turn around by giving Caliphos 6X, and kill your plant. You might find that if you're giving a particular homeopathic remedy and they're not complementary, as I mentioned earlier, it might not be as effective, or it might negate the progress. But this is one of the beautiful things about agrohomeopathy, is because we do have this window of opportunity that we can bring these remedies to our plants and, to our farms and see what they can do, and really see what they can do with some of the things we're dealing with. Okay, so some wildlife tips for those wildlife people out there. We talked about the deer. So we use the 30C. We also use the sulfur indoors. We talked about arsenicum 30C. I'm actually testing that right now for ant control. I want to see how that actually works for us. And then we use a lot of companion plants, and I recommend that for our clients. And I find mint and oregano, I'm amazed at how much good they will do. Like if you're in a place that has a lot of ants, our soil is very sandy here, so we tend to have a lot of ants going on. And the more that we're planting the mints and the oregano, and the more that we're recommending that to our clients, like a lot of clients have Rose of Sharon around our area. And they find that the ants are all over it right now because we have the water and such going on. And so the oregano is a really nice companion plant that you actually can plant to the base of some of your larger plants that are having problems with ants. And, you deter your ants, plus you have something great you have a great herb to actually eat. So more companion planting, we're finding is helpful. And the companion planting, we find does not cause problems with the homeopathic remedies. And so that's kind of the space that we're in as far as trying to bring balance, again, for our property, for our clients' properties and the farms, and find some of the natural ways to put out, basically put out some of these fires that we're seeing as far as with an overabundance of insects, and an overabundance of insects that we're finding in our soil because we're not having the cold weather to kill things and the natural cycles that we've all been used to. All right. So I just am going to throw out that is all the information that I have to share tonight with you guys. I did want to share with you, I do offer virtual and on-site services depending where you are. Although I will travel, so if it's pretty, I'll come and hang. But we do what's called agrohomeopathy plans. So we're identifying the plants and the trees, basically. So if it's virtual, you would take pictures. If you live here locally, we actually will visit homes and farms. And we also will identify what the plants are susceptible to. So some of the things that we talked about earlier with the cedar rust and the apple trees and the pear trees and all of the other different types of insects that we're dealing with in various areas. So we'll help you with that, do a lot of the research if it's something new for us. And then we'll identify the best remedies that you can apply when the problems occur. So if this information is intriguing to you, but you're a little overwhelmed and you're not sure, well, where do I start and what do I apply? We can help you with those pieces to whatever level you would like. We're also really encouraging and practicing ourselves in trying to research more what remedies we can actually do seasonally, as I talked about, so that we can increase the health of our plants and our animals and our food, but get ahead of the curve of some of the problems that we're seeing rather than reacting. And now you have sick plants and you already have a lot of disease on the property. So there are certain protocols that we've been kind of working through that I would love to share with folks if they're interested also. You can combine your plant and animal questions if you're someone that's interested in both into an agrohomeopathic plan. So we do a lot of like homesteading, or if you have a farm and you have sheep or sheep, I'll show you the pictures. Here we go. So here's some of our farm clients. We work with all of these different types of animals, and when we do this, because again, I'm not a vet, so what we do is we work with the homeowner or with the farmer. So I'm really passionate about bringing homeopathy into everyone's homes, onto farms, and teaching people how they actually can do these things themselves. So it's more coaching, I mean, I've seen a lot of different things with some of the farm animals and able to make some assessments and to help people. But I like, obviously, people to work with their vets. I don't like the practice of, kind of it's us against them type thing from a conventional and natural. I think the best thing that would happen to all of us in this planet is that if we could bring homeopathy and conventional together and really, use the things that are positive about both, use those areas and combine them. But my goal really is to bring as much as I can the homeopathic kits and all of this information to farmers and to gardeners and people at home, so that we all have a resource to use for ourselves, for our family, for our kids, for our animals, and really create a safer, healthier planet for ourselves and our wildlife. And so these guys, we work with ducks, as you'll see on the right, ponies, horses, cats, dogs. I have a lot of people that ask me questions, and we do work around chickens. So that's another one. So any of those types of creatures. And again, the remedies are the same. And I think an important thing for people to also realize, if you're not super familiar with homeopathy, is, it is so inexpensive in comparison to a lot of the resources that we have right now. Whether we're talking about agriculture or animal care, or human care. So the stronger and the healthier and more vital that we can all be, then we don't have to necessarily spend a lot of money on some of the other things that might not be as healthy for us. So it's very much about being proactive. A lot of preventative type solutions is really where we like to bring our clients and teach them. All right, so that is it for me. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. I hope this was enjoyable to everyone. I know it was a lot of information. This is our website, so you can reach me at my phone number there. I do cell phone, so I text also if people would like. The website you can subscribe to. We are actually adding to our website and joining a different platform for videos and such. So please, if you're interested in this information, subscribe to the site, and then I will make sure that I keep in touch with you as we do make some changes to our kind of social media platforms, and that you can stay in touch with us. And thank you very much. Okay, Erin, back to you.
Christina, thank you so much. This was absolutely amazing. And the accolades are pouring in. The chat is just flooded with people
good.
You and just gushing about it. So thank you so much. We will get to the questions and all the questions. Christina's so graciously offered to stay around, and people are just, seriously, compliments won't stop here. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you, everyone.
It's just great.
Thank you.
Yeah, please get a hold of Chris. If you could flip to the next slide, we'll just kind of do a little.
Here we go. Sorry about that.
Perfect. So Canadians for Homeopathy, we just wanted to thank you for joining us for this. The webinar is about to educate about homeopathy, and it's not, of course, intended to be used in place of, consultation with a medical professional. This was, of course, it was about plants. So, no real worries there, but always feel free to contact a professional homeopath if you have deeper questions about that. We'd love to hear from you at canadiansforhomeopathy.com. There's our email up there. By signing up for this webinar, you have subscribed to our newsletter. You got a little notice about that when you did sign up. So you'll be receiving the next one. We are, like we said, we're here to educate, communicate, advocate, and celebrate. We are a grassroots organization. We are entirely volunteer run. And we are passionate about educating people about homeopathy, sharing good information about homeopathy, and advocating for homeopathy. So being entirely volunteer run, we do need your support and help to do all this. We do have expenses, the Zoom account, the website maintenance, all those sorts of things. So you can help us by donating. It would be incredibly gratefully received. Also by volunteering with us if you're interested, or by telling people about us. So we'll just pop the link to donate in the chat here in a second. We have a way through PayPal, so that's a way to use your credit card or whatever. You can also e-transfer us to our email address there. If we had a wonderful turnout, if that's credit to you, Christina, if everyone here even just donated $2, that would make a big difference to us to keep things going with our maintenance expenses. So any amount, big or small, would be gratefully received. We've had a ton of questions about accessing the recording and the slides. So the recording will be available on our website. So much good feedback about that. People are anxious to watch that. As an organization, we are committed to our webinars always being free to watch live. So please keep your eyes peeled for our live webinars. And we do have recordings of past webinars on our website. So Canadiansforhomeopathy.com, go check those out. There's a webinar section. We are in the process of moving to a new system where the recorded webinars will be part of the thank you perks that we offer to people when they donate to us, along with some other cool discounts and things. But that system is still under construction. So for now, head on over and watch the webinars that are there, because they're available, and we'll be uploading this one in the near future. But yeah, and our live webinars will always be free, because we want to keep promoting homeopathy. If you have a skill set to offer, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you and see if there's a match for you volunteering with us. And also just tell your friends, your family, your health food store, your naturopath, your chiropractor, your massage therapist, anyone you can tell about us. We love it when we get good attendance at our webinars like this one, which was just massive attendance. So, and just keep an eye on our upcoming offerings. You're going to get some newsletters. So that's fabulous about that. And our website. So, and thank you. Just thank you all for being here. It's so important. We have a strong and amazing and vibrant homeopathic community. So just by being here, you did that. So if I could grab the next slide from you, Chris, it'll be our last slide here. We show you just to, we are taking a little break for summer, July and August. We're not offering, we don't have webinars, but we're going to be back in September with about a webinar a month. Again, free to watch live. And we are going to be coming up with that list and letting you know on our website and through our newsletter in August. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I think we are now ready to move to the absolute flood of questions. I've already answered some basics about homeopathy and stuff in the chat, but I'm gonna start feeding you some questions, Christina, if you're okay with that. We've got it's a flood. We'll see how many we get to, but and some of them you may have gotten to throughout, but so there's a lot of really specific questions about specific issues. Okay. I will maybe give you some more general ones and then we can get to the specific ones. Okay. This is interesting. Do you know, and it might vary country to country, we don't expect you to be an expert on everything in the entire world, but will organic certifiers allow you to use homeopathy and remain certified organic? That's from Sarah.
So, Sarah, that's a great question. And I am actually in the process right now of researching that. I do have a person that wants to use homeopathy, but she is certified organic. So we've been doing work with folks that follow organic practices. So here in the United States, you can basically, farmers and different people can put out that they follow organic practices, or they can say that they're certified organic. To date, I have not worked with anyone that has been certified organic for that reason at the moment. So I don't have it, and I'm researching that. So if you want to send me an email and say, hey, Chris, like I'm curious, where was this? Is it in the US?
I'm not sure. It didn't, we just have a name. We don't know where.
Okay. So in the US, I do not yet have, because that's a conversation I just had with someone that is a friend, and she's a client, but she doesn't do it with the vegetables and the herbs that she sells, but she would like to. And she has talked to me about that she's like, I can't do this until we can show that it is quote unquote considered organic, approved, certified organic.
Okay.
It's an excellent question though. And I think it's something that needs to be, I can't see, I don't know. I can't, Erin, can you see any reason why it would not be unless
I can't think of why it doesn't
I
in
know.
any way. I mean, by conventional thinking, it's water you're applying by
Right.
conventional
Well,
thinking. So,
I think the only other piece that came to my mind when I was thinking it through in the conversation with this person was that the resource. So, well, you have the pellet. So I don't know if the pellets could be considered non-organic. I mean, it should not be a problem in my opinion, in my humble opinion. but I'm researching in US. So if anyone is in US and wants to know that answer, just subscribe to the site, or send me an email, and I promise you I will respond back to you what I learn.
fantastic. And we just had Sherry Maines, who actually is quite knowledgeable on the topic. Yep. She just popped into the chat and said, you can buy organic pellets.
Excellent.
So I'm not sure, Sherry, if you want to throw information about that in the chat for everyone. You might know more than, she said Ohm Farm is a good resource in, I think they're Texas based, OHM.
And will it be approved in other states for, so does she know that answer?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll give her some time to, I'll ask another question and we'll give her some time to chat.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great to know.
Yeah. Sherry's asking, but the question was, Chris, can you ask Sherry your question again about this?
So will that pass as far as organic certified farmers, the use of? Because they're pretty strict here in Massachusetts, and that was the client's concern on my side too.
Yeah, she said she's not sure. So
okay. All right.
Another question. What quantity of homeopathics did you use for the trees? Janice says she sees a lot of trees that have quote unquote chosen to stop taking on water as a sacrifice for the health of other trees nearby. So
the question is how large is the
quantity is what, it's just in chat here, so we can't clarify unless she, but what quantity of homeopathics for the
so that container that you actually saw, so that's a I mean, I have a 5 liter that I use here. I basically will just use that and water the base of the tree. I don't find that you need to have large quantities to supply the trees at all. So I mean, I basically, if you take a pellet per cup, right, and what you want to, like, you do one application. If you were watering a tree with a hose, or you were watering a tree just to provide it more water, I would use that same, I guess, amount. But what I do is I use I think that's a 5. I apologize. But I think I use that, and I'll fill that. Like, we have very large pine trees here. I literally will take, and I probably will use 2 of those because it's a pretty large circumference of the tree, and just give it a very good watering with the homeopathic remedies. And I have found that that's suitable. Same thing for the mulberry. I'm thinking but I might use less, say, for a smaller pear tree. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's just basically, yeah. I mean, basically, I find that we really do have to just, if you're watering like a plant and the plant needs water and you're giving it a homeopathic remedy, then I would use that same quantity of water that would contain the remedy.
Perfect. Thank you. This is a really interesting one. If you put the pellets into some snow, would it go with the snow melt, and would the homeopathic effect transfer kind of beyond the area and travel with the snow melt and kind of do a larger area?
I don't know the answer to that. It is an interesting one, though.
That is an interesting thought.
It is an interesting thought. I mean, the homeopathic remedies from an energetic side, if you're putting it in water or you're putting it in snow, you know, will it work? I don't know. I don't know the answer from a standpoint of, so meaning if you were to trying to supply something elsewhere and just wanted to have it in the snow melt. Is that kind of the, it's interesting because I have had thoughts about what would happen if I took homeopathic remedies and put it into large bodies of water, but then I'm told I'm not supposed to do that, right? So, oh, so don't record that, Erin.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, too late, but you know, but well,
I wouldn't do that. But in all seriousness, I mean, I don't know the answers. I've never done that. I've never tried that piece. I do, but I mean,
it's
if you're
cool
adding
to think about for what you would want to give your plants right at the beginning of spring. If you put a little bit in just right around the, you know, it would be.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't find, a lot of times people will say, well, you really have to clear out. I mean, when I give to a tree or I give to a plant, I will try to kind of clear the area a little bit. Like if there's leaves or there's snow, you know, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. I apologize. I might be getting a little tired. But I mean, I would like, snow wouldn't interfere in my mind. So if I have the remedies and I have it in water, I would pour it and apply it to the tree through the snow, and that wouldn't in my mind, that would be okay. I have a tendency when I clean out around the trees and I'm applying, or like around the apple trees or any of those places, or anyone that, like, say people have a lot of weeds around their trees, then I will recommend to them that they try to clear that area, because if you're giving the homeopathic remedy into the ground, you want it to go to the tree, not to the weeds around it, right? So that's the practice that I follow and the practice that I would suggest to people.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. We've what's the ratio of pellet to water if the pellets are smaller than the number 3? Does that make a difference to you?
That does not technically, to me, that does not make a difference. However, usually what I've seen people follow is if you're using the grains, I usually will suggest to people to do like 5 grains rather than the one of the size 3 for folks that know the homeopathic. Again, I think there's a lot of conversation around that sometimes. I mean, I think when you talk sometimes to some homeopaths, the quantity of the pellets makes a difference. To some other homeopaths, it doesn't necessarily. In the work that I do with the plants, I find that the 3 pellet is the best one to make sure that it gets into the solution and it's actually absorbed. But if I was using the grains, I guess to feel, I don't find the quantity matters, I guess. So yeah. And this is kind of one of those conversations that you can ask probably 100 homeopaths and get 100 different answers. For anyone that's on the phone, I'm sure everyone's like, yeah. So, I mean, but if people are comfortable and they're using the slight grains, I would say if it makes you feel comfortable, use like 5 of those, and you're receiving, in my mind, probably what you would be suitable.
Okay, wonderful. We'll just dive right into all the questions about individual things. I think some of it you actually covered as you went on. People typed in early. So if that's the case, you know, just, you know, they can maybe reaccess that. But fungus on nectarines, curly leaf, and fungus on irises.
So the fungus on the nectarines would be thuya. That would, at least that would be where I would start, would be the fungus. If I didn't know anything else, like remember when we were talking on the slides, I asked the question, or I made the statement of, was it from cold weather or was it from warm weather? But if it's something that's systemic, which is what like we have found with a lot of the fruit trees that we have, I will do the cuprum and the thuya in a rotation. And I find that that's the most effective thing to do. And then I think I did put in that slide about the cuprum and the thuya, and then kelp carb, and I'll use kelp carb because one of the things you're trying to do is also improve the strength and the blossom and the fruiting process, right, for that plant. So that is kind of the strengthening portion in my mind, and then the cuprum and the thuya in rotation is for the fungal, if you don't have specific information.
Perfect. Barb writes, scale, help defeating scale.
So the best one that I have found is the petroleum. That one has been amazing with scale. That is, like, I've had the scale on, let me see, we've had 2 clients that had it on Rosa Sharon. We've seen it on rosemary. We've seen it on, I'm trying to think of other plants. I mean, we've seen it on at least a dozen different plants. And I always go to petroleum and find success with petroleum.
Wonderful, wonderful. My rose leaves and strawberry leaves were eaten by a little green worm. I think it might be a sawfly larva. Suggestions for that?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, sulfur popped into my mind, because that will help a lot of times with the worm, with the moth worms and such. But what does the plant actually look? We don't know, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, you know, hey, great. We've got a ton of questions. So maybe we'll double
I mean, that's a good
back.
example. Well, that like, to that point though, Erin, that like that one, that is one that I would have more questions about. You know what I mean? Like some of them, and again, like that's why I said the rotation with the cuprum and the thuya. I mean, I do think it's important for folks to realize, like any type of homeopathy, right? There are multiple homeopathic remedies that can resolve or assist the same condition. And so that's why, I mean, you can try a couple and that's cool. Or like, if you go back and actually look at the specific information about the plant, that's going to help you even more, because is it better by heat? Is it worse by heat? Did this happen from the heat? You know what I mean? Those types of questions, those actually really do come into play if you want to kind of have the best results, the best results quicker, I should say.
Right.
Or you can just run through specific remedies that are known for aphids or known for scale. You have that option also. So it depends on really how you approach it.
Kind of back to your first, almost the first thing you said, which was you're taking the case of the plant in some ways, not just using a diagnosis, you know? Yeah, so that all approaches are great. Okay, perfect. Homeopathic remedies for deterring birds eating plants and fruit. Would those be the same as the deers? They're eating a lot of the fruit.
Yep, those are the ones that we use for any of the creatures. So we use the camphor and we use the sulfur, and those are the 2. We have woodchucks, so we use the same thing for all of them across the board.
Okay, great. Someone was asking, but it was very early in the presentation, about they'd heard about lower potencies in agrohomeopathy, but I think you actually ended up addressing that throughout your potency choices. So yeah, perfect. How about any discussion? Michael asks if you had any discussion about with larger scale growing operations, for example, how to bring these remedies to high acreage farms.
So we actually did do that for the case that I think I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. So you basically can use the same, you use the same principles that you would use for a cup of water. You just have to upscale that quantity, the calculation. And I have actual calculations that we used, and there's research around some of the calculations too that I could share with people. But it's the same process. It's just a matter of, if it goes into a sprayer, you need it to go into a sprayer that is clean. So one of the challenges that we did run into is we were fortunate at the one place that we were at, and then there was another place that we had talked to about doing some things, but they actually didn't have the equipment that was going to be free of pesticides. You know what I mean? So you can't have that crossover. But if you're working with someone or someone that does not use any of the chemicals and the pesticides, those sprayer devices. So I meant to put a picture on the slides, because basically the tractor that has the large containers that go through the fields and spray, that is what we did for 2 of the fields periodically with this particular client.
Wow, wonderful. Okay. You talked about this a little bit, but I think it would probably be really interesting for everyone to have you go over again, which is how long before you see a difference in general after with homeopathic treatment for your plants?
So what I think I had put in there that, I mean, we typically will see some type of improvement within 24 to 72 hours. But again, it depends what it is. So if you have a plant that's simply been neglected and you give it a remedy called silica, right? Or there's another remedy that's called staphysagria, which is also used for neglect. There's a few remedies, then you're going to see pretty quickly that remedy will just in general look better. Now, some people will argue and say, well, you gave it water, right? Like if that's, like, it's like, and that's I think that's a fair argument, right? But usually people will say, well, I've tried to give it water and, the next day it still looks terrible. Right. So now you gave it water, but that water had silica or staphysagria and it doesn't look terrible any longer. Right. So now you do have that. Well, it's not just the water then. So those ones are those are kind of straightforward and easy. The ones when you're dealing with, we have found at least like what I was talking about earlier, the fungus and, the pear rust and those, the grapevines that I showed you guys in the beginning, those are long cases and tough cases because they've been going on for so long. So the pear trees that we're working on, I mean, everyone told us to take them down. They were like, you're never going to do it. And I was like, oh yes, we will. Right. So, but I mean, it's been like 3, I think we're on 3, if not 4, and they're getting better and better and better. You know what I mean? So it's something, might be 3. Sorry, I'm thinking in my head, Erin, but
Not everything's an emergency, right?
Well, it's not because because there's 2 things that occur. One, it's already been deep rooted, right? So it's no different than when you think about homeopathy for a person or an animal. If it's deep rooted and has layers, you have to take those layers off. And then the other thing that we have is that if you have obstacles to cure, which we talk about in homeopathy, which is what's going on in the environment, right? So I mentioned early on that if you have a bunch of cedar trees, like right around the corner from your fruit trees, then you have what we would call in our world obstacle to cure, or that environmental piece. So that's why we have started to treat both. A lot of people, we've been trying to actually treat the cedar trees to actually prevent that whole hosting piece that comes up with the pear rust, so that we actually can keep both of them. But you have to keep that in mind that, it's not like a pesticide where you spray it, you kill it. But by the way, they always come back. Right. So with homeopathy, we're looking to get to the root, and then hopefully it gets stronger and stronger. You've removed that susceptibility, and now you don't have to, repeat as often, and things aren't coming back.
Right. Yeah. Just like with good long-term homeopathic treatment, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Wonderful. This is a question it's about accessing remedies. So maybe I probably can give a little bit of the Canadian answer, and maybe you can speak to the American answer. It's just basically, where do you find these remedies specific for plants? I don't think I've seen them at health food stores. A lot of them are really the same remedies we use in our first aid kits for treating people. So a lot of them, try the health food stores. I would say for Canada, ask your health food store person. And if not, you can order a lot of them from manufacturers. So, in Canada, we've got Boiron, Canada, HomeoCan, Jackson's. There's a few others in Canada. But, you can even just kind of Google it up there. And, but yeah, ask your local health food store. A lot of them are those. The specialty ones, I think, that you can order from England, or probably from some of the American pharmacies.
So there are, that would be what I would recommend also. I mean, we do get some of the plant ones, and to your point, most of the ones I put in the presentation actually this evening are remedies that we have in our kits. They might not be in everyone's travel kit, but you can get them. You can, and they're 30 Cs, the 6Xs, and the 200 Cs. So you can get them at most of the health food stores, I think, or like you said, you can get them online. There's a couple like Bombix, for example, that I think is one that you don't see, but if you Google it, you'll find that your like homeopathic pharmacies will show up that you folks are probably familiar with, and then you'll be able to get it. And if anyone has a problem finding one, just let me know. And I can give you guys a specific couple of pharmacies that I have found that I've seen them. I have no problem with that.
Someone was wondering about specifically encouraging fruit production. They're asking about their lemon tree specifically, but I think there's another question also about later on about promoting fruit production.
So the big remedy that we use for fruit and flowering fruit is kelp carb. That's, I mean, there's others, but that one has been one that we've been using. And I'm amazed, like the roses, I think was on the first slide. That poor rose bush I had, unfortunately, I had forgot about, and I said that was a good thing, but it actually wasn't in that case. And so I ended up treating it for a couple of things, but then I gave it the kelp carb, and I haven't seen it blossom like that since we got it. So, and we give that to pretty much any flower or fruit. That's the homeopathic remedy that I usually will turn to after treating. If there's any problems, then I usually will follow with the kelp carb. Usually I'll follow with kelp carb 30C, but if you're also trying to do the fertilizer, then I'll look at the kelp carb 6X.
Okay, great. Someone's asking, our wonderful Elizabeth is asking, I have a small walnut tree that has shrunk in size over the last 15 years. Every year there's a bit of a die off of its extremities and almost no nuts for years. Any thoughts about that?
Off the top of my head, well, silica just came to me, but I don't think that that's the only remedy I would look at. So it's got die off, so it's weak. So again, like the remedies that are coming to me, Elizabeth, are, and that would be something I would take a case for, like we were talking about, but I would look at the silica, I would look at the calendula, or calendula, depending how people say that. There's a couple others that I'm trying to think of off the top of my head that aren't coming to me, because there is that small side, they're not producing like they did before. But those would be two off the top of my head. And then if you sent me more details from the slide, that question, then I would answer. I'd be happy, Elizabeth, to go back and do a little mini test to see which ones come up for me after seeing more information.
Wonderful. That's so nice. Nicole's wondering about the Bombix remedy. She is a homeopath and hasn't heard of that one before. Is it, yeah.
It's a caterpillar. It's actually made from the caterpillar. Okay. So it's really interesting because and that's what we put that. The biggest one that we'll use the Bombix for is for the tomato hornworm. So the actual homeopathic remedy is from is caterpillar. Okay. I know in the UK you can get it at Helios carries the Bombix.
Someone's wondering about putting pellets directly into the soil, pushing the pellets into the soil.
I have not tried or researched that. So I can't actually answer that. I don't know if there's anyone else on that has been doing. I mean, to me, I think you want the energetic quality. I think you want the pellets to be in the water to actually then be dispersed. So I haven't tried that, Erin. So I can't really speak to it. I don't know if anyone else has tried it. I know we have some agro people on.
Yeah, we'll see if anything pops up for answers here in the next little bit.
I haven't not tried that.
Yeah, I mean, like the snow, perhaps if it was right before a rain, it would end up doing the same thing.
Exactly. I mean, I think it would, but I think I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, I was thinking that if it was wet and it was damp, then I think it would probably reach, but in my mind, I think for it to be most effective and to get down to the roots, you would want to actually put it in a water solution first.
Right. I'm gonna do a whole bunch of no pun intended, birds with one stone here. Multiple questions about whether camphora is good for squirrels, rabbits, moths indoors, eating clothes. But what about all the pests? Camphora can you just yeah.
The camphor is the first one that I use. If I don't for any of those. If I don't have luck with the camphora, the next one that I will try is sulfur. And I think I spoke to, I still struggle. We have so many ants right now. And I've done the camphora and the sulfur, and it does seem to deter them, but I'm not getting the results that I want because we have so many, and we're trying arsenicum album right now. But I cannot give an answer whether that has been successful or not, because we just started to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Sherry's wondering if you have any books for agrohomeopathy you recommend.
The big one that I love is Mott. And then I'm not going to say the gentleman's name correctly, the other gardening book.
Cavirage, that one?
Yes, thank you. Those are the two, and those are the two primary ones that I like read and research and utilize. And then I have a couple of different websites that I've found from other places in the world that have some pretty good information. But I think from book perspective, those are probably the two books that I have found.
Great. Just lots of questions about specifics, but I think you covered so much of it as you went on. These came in early in the webinar and you kind of ended up going over them. So I'm kind of trying to, some about the fertilizer that there was 2 or 3 questions about the fertilizer sort of combination that you suggested. I think you went over it quite well with potency and frequency of dosing, but there just seems to be some clarification. Is there any other information how?
So what we do, yeah, sure. So what we use, so what I've combined, and so I researched to see if they would be complementary, because I know that there is, again, our general practice, I think, in homeopathy overall, right, is you take one remedy and you wait for the results. You don't necessarily mix them, especially if you don't know if they're complementary or not. And so I tend not to do that. However, as I mentioned earlier, depending on what you're working on and depending on if you know what's complementary and what's not, we make those exceptions. So calc carb, I tend to use calc carb, mag phos, and Cali phos. Let me go back to the screens. Can I go back to the screen, Erin?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, you bet. All
right, let me see. Let me go back. So the ones that and I guess I ran out of, I thought usually I'll put in here specific, or maybe I did. No. Okay. So the fertilizer. So we have the calc carb. So what we do is we'll do calc carb 6x, Cali phos 6x, and mag phos 6x. Those 3 I'll pair together. Not pair, there's 3 of them, I'm sorry. So those 3 I will combine together in one solution and I will use. But some people will say that you really shouldn't mix the 3. You shouldn't mix any of them per se, because of the fact that 1, they might not be complementary, and 2, that you do have the practice that, well, what's doing what type thing. But for me, those 3 from a fertilizer growth seedling side have been very successful. And so I have a few homeopathic remedies that I will use, quote unquote, combination remedies. So that's technically a combination remedy that I'm just making myself, right? Cali phos, mag phos, and calc carb in one actual water solution. So I would put that in that jug and I will spray the seedlings that I showed you guys a picture of after I've done the silica 200C, and it's about a week usually after or once they start to grow, excuse me, I'll give that fertilizer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And again, that's my protocol. That's a protocol that has worked for me. I
That's
know,
what
like,
I want to know.
like I mentioned though Mott and homeopathy for plants. I don't, like, I know in her book, in my research with her, I think she does one at a time. For that, I think for that reason, I'm pretty sure she is the one that has said that. And again, that follows all the principles we've talked about, right? Like, it's, yes, in a perfect world, I agree, we should be doing one at a time. But if you're trying to do this for a larger scale, which we have been and we were, then it's difficult to do that because we don't have the time, right? You don't have the capacity because you're trying to reach them such a large quantity. And so that's kind of where that came from. But I will say that if I could just give one, then wait, and 72 hours at a minimum, then that would be what I would suggest to people. And especially for people that are learning homeopathy, I think it's a really good idea to do one remedy at a time, because I think it's important for people to actually see the results. You know what I mean? As someone that has been doing it for a while, then I know those work for me. And so I know I'm going to, to have the tendency to get the result that I want.
You
And
start
so, and if
to
it,
get a feel for it,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So, I mean, I think it's an excellent practice. Don't get me wrong. I mean, but we had to make some changes because we just couldn't from a time side, and our clients would be like, I don't have that, or they don't even have they don't want to have to remember that they have to do that in 72 hours or next week. So we do make some exceptions on ones, but we will check to make sure that those remedies are actually complementary.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you. It's good, great answer. We have, again, I'm going to kind of combine a few questions here. People wondering about getting rid of unwanted or invasive species, like killing poison ivy, nutgrass. There's a few others, if anything can be done in that way.
So I have not had great success in that area. I have tried to get rid of a couple of things. Again, it was at a farm and I forget the name of the grass. And I actually found a specific homeopathic remedy. I can't think of the name of well, maybe there is a specific name of a homeopathic pharmacy that has a lot of the more unusual homeopathic remedies. And one of them, they do have one that I think is for weed, to basically deter weeds. And I did get it. I can't remember the name of it. I have no problem sending it out to someone if they would like to email me. But I did not have good luck with it, I have to say. So I have not had a lot of good luck in the weed world at all. So
it's hard, right? Because it makes things healthier. So yeah.
Well, yeah, it is and it is interesting because I've read that you can do that, and that was one of the reasons I tried to do that, but it did not work for us. And I did get feedback that he felt like he had more after I was done, and I was like, oh boy. So
Oh, and I know you covered this in your presentation, but just multiple questions on confirming how you clean out your containers between remedies. People just want to make sure they're doing it right, I think.
So for me, I use just hot water. I just use hot water. I mean, if I have for some reason, sometimes every once in a while, the containers, if they get left somewhere, or like if a solution is left too long, and it's a humid day, I make sure they're clean, you know what I mean? I might use like a touch of soap in that type of situation, but then I'm going to rinse it very, 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 very well. But in between, given homeopathic remedies, I will simply empty the container, wash it out with hot water, usually clean it out then with cool water, and just make sure that there is no remaining homeopathic remedy from before. And that's really, and then I only use my containers for homeopathic remedies. So I'm not really worried too much about cleaning out other debris and things like that. It's only that occasional one that might get left somewhere, left somewhere. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, you've been sitting here too long. But that doesn't even typically happen because they're so clean, because the only thing I'm putting into them is homeopathic remedies to begin with. But I haven't used any other, I don't use any type of cleaner between to remove the homeopathic remedy. I have not found the need to do that or found anything interfering with it.
Yeah. So just the good rinse and
I mean, we use hot water, and I mean, we use the hot water, and like I said, but that hot water and then cool water, and then I let it dry, and then I usually go to my next remedy, and that works fine for us.
Perfect. There is, all these, questions about individual things, but I think you really covered most of them, so we won't keep you too much longer. Someone did just check again about, dosing different sizes of plants, like a 2-foot high bush versus a 20-foot high tree. So again, just kind of quantity and use your instinct, I think you said earlier, hey?
Right. I mean, it's, it's not about the number of pellets per se. It's about basically it being the correct remedy. And then the number of pellets, the 1 pellet per cup, again, we have found is successful. So if you need to thoroughly water a giant pine, for example, you need 2 large containers of water, then I would measure, it would be 1 pellet per cup within that container, right? Or if you have a tiny little plant sitting on your counter and you just need a cup of water, I would just give 1 pellet for that 1 cup. So I just scale up, and that works well for me. There are, in those books that you asked me about, there are different, people can look at those. I would definitely recommend those. I don't know if you could put those in the chat room, Erin.
Yeah, let's do that, you bet.
So it's homeopathy for plants, and it's not Chris, it's
Coach,
yeah. Her book is wonderful. That was one of the only books I could find.
Oh, Elizabeth said she's already put them in the chat. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. That's perfect. And those do have in there also, folks will find in there, like, different ways to apply the quantity, excuse me, and that might be helpful for people also. I'm giving you guys the practices that we follow and our clients follow, and those do work, but there are different ways. And I think if you look at the other book, the Caveat, I don't think his is the same as hers. So again, and I think he might do some larger scale things. I think there might be some acres and such in his that might be helpful to people. But and that's one of the reasons, like, for this presentation, I wanted to keep that portion simple from the standpoint that we find that one pellet per 1 cup. I knew the granule would come up too, and so I should have just said 3 to 5, because that's that's fair. I think that's fair. Right? I think that's a good practice. But you will find that you're going to kind of get different answers from different resources. And I think that folks need to just, pick a process that they follow, try a process that they follow, which is what we've done here and I'm sharing, and go with that. And then if you find that something isn't working, then, keep that in your mind to look at it from another, well, maybe I need to do a little bit more because of this particular situation, or if you're talking about large acreage and such. Does that make sense?
Fabulous answer. Yeah. And just so encouraging for people to just try. So, I'm gonna ask one last one, because other than that, it's more about specific little invaders, and you've given lots of good resources and lots of information about all that already. But someone's asking if you've ever tried using, like, taking the pest like ants and making a homeopathic remedy from them for the plant, that taking them from the plant and then giving it back to the plant.
Yep. It makes perfect sense. I have not. We were just talking about it today. I have not actually done that myself. I think it's a great idea though. And that's actually documented quite a bit. So if people have that desire to do that, and they have the means to do that, and the time, you know what I mean? Like, if it's something they want to do, it makes perfect sense from a homeopathic perspective. And I encourage people to try it, and I'd love to see the results. I have not personally done that. We use the homeopathic remedies that we use. One of the things we really do try to do is use standard homeopathic remedies that are accessible to everybody, right? And are also going to be something that we can give to our clients that are, that will actually, okay, here is the kit and here are the homeopathic remedies I can use. And then obviously there are cases, as that person's mentioning, they might give all of these different remedies we're discussing tonight and it may not work. And in that case, that's a great resource.
Exactly. And Sherry actually already said in the chat, she's tried that with grasshoppers and it's worked well for her. So
oh, cool.
This bodes well. I have the most long-standing, like a decade-long case of mealybugs on my honeysuckle vine, and I have some soaking in vodka right now, making a tincture out of it. So I'll give you a report too. We'll see. But you've given me other good things to try that I might try some petroleum on there first. So cool. Thank you so much. We could go on all night with questions, but people have all the, know how to access you and all this and the recording and some great other books and everything. So, we'll let you go at that, but thank you so much, Christina. It was clearly a huge hit. I don't know if we've ever had this many questions, so many we couldn't even get to them all. So,
well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for attending. Homeopathy is awesome, as we all know. So the power that we can do with the plants is great. And if people just have, email me if there's, I'll do my best to respond to people, because I think it's really important right now with homeopathy and plants. It's a huge space for us right now because of what's going on, I think, in the environment. So, and there still is so much research that, we want to be doing. So if people have things they're testing and they want to share and pictures and things like that, I'm hoping very shortly in the new social media platform to have the ability to let people actually put up their pictures, right? So we can see, like I did tonight, the before and the after, and we can kind of continue this in more of a, trying these things. And I know that people have some, I think Sherry has a really wonderful Facebook page that you guys, they're always going back and forth on that. So it's along kind of that lines, and that's awesome. But like, just to try to see the befores and the afters and be able to track it, because I'm really trying to capture the research and be able to show this, like this is what it looks like before, and this is what it looked like after, and this is what we did. And the more that we can all do that, then the more we can all share that with our family and communities and move things along. So thank you everyone very much. It was really, I didn't get to see or talk to people, but thank you for attending and the opportunity.
Just brilliant. Thank you so much, Christina. And thanks everyone for coming, and have a lovely rest of your Monday night.
Okay. All right. Bye everyone.